sun.
I am Ryan Brown, and this is the Unvarnished podcast, and I am sitting in the Academy of Realist Art in Boston with Garrett, I'm sorry, say your last name.
Vitanza.
Garrett Vitanza and Julie Beck, and I'm right now teaching a landscape workshop here, which I'm very grateful. Thank you for bringing me out. It's been really fun. I love the excuse to come to Boston anytime I can. My wife and I are talking about moving next summer out of Utah and hoping to settle somewhere on the East Coast, and I'm desperate to maybe be able to have everyone here as part of my more immediate community, because I love it so much. I love the city. I love what you guys are doing with the school. I'm fans of your work. So again, thank you for having me out. It's always a pleasure to be here. And let's talk about all of it, where it started. I know that John Angel had, at one point, they had 2 locations, and one was in Toronto. Is that right? And from that, the founder of this school studied, right? And then her name's Cindy, and she came down here and started her own thing. Do you know the impetus for that? What made her want to? Is she from Boston? Why Boston? What was her motivation for opening Academy? Who were the first teachers? And then maybe when did you guys come in from there?
So Cindy studied with, as you said, Michael John Angel, and then I believe she also studied with my teacher Fernando Freitas, who is currently the senior instructor at the Academy of Realist Art, Toronto. And when I had first gone to Toronto, it still was Michael John Angel Studios, and then that exchange or transition happened while I was there. I'm not 100% sure as like what the impetus was for. Cindy has always been an advocate for education, and is I want to say that she always intended to open a school of some sort, and I think that I think it was in Boston because I think it might have been coincidental with
her husband working here.
Yeah. And so that was in terms of geographically why Boston. I think it was out of just out of that convenience. But also Boston does have a rich kind of artistic history to it, especially with the representational tradition as well.
Yeah.
So myself personally, I think I started teaching here in, I want to say it was 2009, 2010.
Okay, so you're one of the OGs.
Mm-hmm. He is the OG.
So initially I was just teaching, I think 1 or 2 days a week, and it was mainly just figure drawing.
And because I think when you and I talked, you were saying that the school opened in 2009?
Yeah.
You studied in, okay, yeah. I was getting confused by the timing. But you studied in Toronto, and then what brought you down here? Did you meet Cindy down there? She was starting something, and you kind of like were part of that?
Partially. So I did know, I met Cindy as when I was a student. When I entered the school in Toronto, Cindy was, I think I actually remember seeing her last still life piece, her graduation piece, and so I met her there, and so we knew of each other, and I believe when I in earnest went to Toronto and studied full time, I want to say it was about 2004, 2005, and I was there for about 3 years, and I then after. So,
and where are you from?
I'm originally from New Jersey originally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did
he started very young?
How did you hear about
genius.
it? And the decision to like dedicate?
Well, I really do have to consider myself fortunate that I had very supportive parents, and they never really discouraged me from pursuing that. They were realistic about obstacles and how it's not going to be easy, but they never discouraged it. Both of them were artistic in their own right. My mother was a dancer for a number of years. My dad had pursued acting and also that performance arts. I think it was, it was really, I want to say must have been 2003, so this is going back quite a bit. And I just remember that frustration that a lot of people feel when they're searching for that is a frustration of ignorance, where it's like, I know something is wrong and I know that I can't accomplish what I'm looking for, but I don't know anything more than that. I don't know how to resolve these problems. So I didn't really know much either. So I just remember typing randomly into Google, just as we all do, just random words put together and hope something comes out. And I do remember putting realist art school, and that was when the at the time the Michael John Angel Academy, later ARA Toronto, popped up. And I brought this up to my father and I said I really would like to study here. And my dad, in his kind of cheeky humor, is like, well, you don't do anything else well, so we should probably pursue it. So,
well, we do need to get you out of your drug habit here. So let's
really,
send you up.
Yeah, we really need to pull you out of this hole. So let's do that. When I think back to it, I mean, he was really just like, he's like, okay, well, let's go for a tour. And so we drove from New Jersey to Toronto, which is about like a 9-hour drive. I met Fernando Freitas and Colleen Johnson, who run the school. And I just, as soon as I walked in and I started looking, and they started pulling barg drawings out, and I was just like, this is exactly what I wanted. And I just fell in love with it.
How old were you?
At that point, I think I was 16, 15, 16.
Yeah.
Wow,
genius.
I didn't. I like I said, I was very fortunate. I had very supportive parents who.
Well, I've had students that young, and I'm so jealous. But I absolutely did not have the awareness at that age that, and the students I've had that are that young are growing up now, or in the last few years, where internet is obviously
Changed
like crazy. There's more and more schools. The movement back to atelier training is massive. So it's so much easier to find. The internet, it has so much more information on it. And representational painting itself has a very strong foothold. But I know, because I started in 2003 at the Florence Academy, nobody had heard of it. Even seeing it at 26, I didn't really know what I was looking at. I was just lucky that they took me, because even when I got there, honestly, I thought they're probably going to ask me to teach within a month, because I'm a college graduate, and I'm coming from what I was told was a really good college. And I was so blind. Even with a BFA, I was so blind. I had no idea what I was looking at when I got there. I walked in, I saw the barg drawings, and I was like, psh. I finished my first barg in an hour and a half.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And they told me to start over. So I started over. Yeah. And the next day, I just really dove into it. I was like, I'm going to show them how great I am. So I spent 2.5 hours on it. And I was like, ta-da.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And they're like, okay, start over.
Yeah.
And then I spent 3 days and really like nailed it. But it took like some time for me to get it pounded in my head.
Oh, absolutely.
What this actually was. But it sounds like you saw it and were like, yep, that's for me.
At 16.
But growing up with creative parents, being exposed, I guess, to a life of creativity, what do you think kind of brought you that awareness at such an early age, when there really was? I mean, this was not well known.
It really wasn't. I mean, like when I think back to that time period, I know there might have been more, but they were really just 3 include 3 major ateliers: Michael John Angel Studios, Cecil Studios, and the Florence Academy, I think.
And Water Street.
And Water Street, of course. Right,
Yeah.
of course, and Water Street.
And did you hear about Water Street, or was that later? Because I'm wondering, like, why would you skip over New York to go to Toronto?
That is a good point, and I it was so long ago, I really can't remember if it was out of ignorance of not knowing it was there, or if it was just the idea of being in. My father was a stockbroker for a long period of time, and he had kind of made me a little concerned about living in New York, and so it might have been that as well, but I really don't remember why that was, but when I actually saw it in person, it was just like it just sold.
Sure.
It was just that recognition of like it's the closest that I feel comfortable saying, like, a vocational calling of some kind. We're like, oh no, this is where I have to be right now.
And I imagine that the environment itself, because I know when I went to the Florence Academy, I even though I didn't really know what I was looking at because I was so blind, the environment itself was like, okay, this is different. It was almost monastic and serious, and absolutely like dedication, and so you probably felt that as well.
Well, yeah, and funnily enough, I had gone to Catholic school my whole life, and I was in my late teens, early 20s. I was seriously considering a monastic life, and I really this life of solitude and contemplation about the big ideas really appealed to me. And so that when I was there and I saw that, where it's like, you get up in the morning, you go to school, you stay there till you're tired enough, and then you go home and go to bed and you repeat. I was like, absolutely, let's do that.
And you were like, okay, so I can live the monastic life, but I can still have sex. Sweet. I'm in.
Yeah, really.
Sign me up.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was just like I wasn't going to Toronto for that part, but it was I mean, I just was in it 100%, and I think that to be I mean, and this is something that it is a two-way street, and I actually do Andrew Emerald, Andy Emerald?
Oh yeah.
I love Andy. He's great.
I love Andy.
And he did a portrait workshop here a couple of years ago, and I've fortunately.
Oh, he did.
That was more than a couple of years ago.
It was, yeah. Well, I forget, the pandemic kind of washed a lot of
sure.
many years ago, and I was fortunately, somebody had actually, funnily enough, I think it was Therese, who actually did have a spot, and then for some reason something came up last minute, and she's like, I don't want a refund, but maybe somebody could take my spot. And luckily I could, and luckily I was there, and I was like, I would love to study with him. And anyway, he said so for me it was kind of a two type workshop. It was learning obviously anatomy and portrait, but I also was just an instruction on teaching as well, just observing him.
He is such a good teacher.
He's really
He's
good.
got the
He's really good.
For people that don't know, Andrew Emerald and did I say that right? Andrew Amaral,
yeah.
And Sean Forrester started the Golden Gate Atelier in Oakland. Yeah.
Yeah, and incredible drafting skills. I mean, like
unbelievable.
Really, almost like
unparalleled, knowledge of anatomy.
A little aggravating, actually.
Like
it's
so
really
good.
Aggravating.
And such a brilliant mind in terms of explaining that. As a teacher,
he has a really good mix of making it digestible, demystifying, but not how do I say this? Like, not decomplicate. Like not oversimplify.
Sure.
But one thing that he said to me that it took a minute for me to digest it, and then I was like, that is absolutely true. He said, it's more important that you're a good student than that I'm a good teacher. And I kind of was like, what? And then
I love that.
And that made perfect sense to me. It was like, it is more important that it's a two-way street, and you need to put the work in as a student.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes, and maybe it's a product of our current society where everybody's so used to having everything immediately given to them,
Sure.
and very product oriented, that when a result doesn't come quickly, they think there's a problem, and it's not me. It's clearly
Sure.
So that's something that always kind of stuck with me, is that it's important that you are, it's more important that you are a great student than that you have a great teacher. Because you can really, I mean, honestly, when it comes to
I'm gonna steal that.
Yeah. Oh, I use it all the time.
Has Andy
I use it all the time.
trademarked that? Because if he has,
I
I'm
don't know.
copyright
Andy,
infringing.
Andy, if you're listening, please don't trademark it. I use it all the time, and I can't afford paying.
Well, I mean, I would love to talk about that idea. I mean, of course, I want to get into the school and whatever, but
Mhm.
that idea is so packed with importance.
Mhm.
Maybe we could try to unpack it a little bit,
Yeah.
because one of the reasons, and I'm going to say this at the risk of offending all the people who have studied with me, but it's not an individual indictment. It's because I've had some really amazing students that I really love, but what I learned over the course of 14 years of running an academy and teaching at various academies and teaching various workshops in a lot of different places is the average person, not just art student, but the average person works better when they're told what to do.
Mhm.
And it's more rare when, to me, the best student was always the one who was willing to skip class because they had an idea they just wanted to pursue. They wanted to like paint on their own. They were just oozing with excitement to actually apply the principles. It was not the one who shows up to class on time every day and cleans up their stuff and does the most well rendered cast and blah blah blah.
Right,
It's the
right.
one who is willing to go through that,
Mhm.
but is motivated by a deeper sense of individual development towards the post application of skill development, which is making art.
Right.
And that I just have learned is not the norm.
Mhm.
Any academy, any art school, any program, probably, whether that's business or anything else. I think it's a human trait that the majority of people on the planet are the worker bees. Which again, I hope that doesn't sound negative. It's more of just a realization of the rarity of that trait of owning the what I guess having that deep intrinsic self-motivation to achieve
absolutely,
and to achieve beyond your environment, whether that's the academy or neighborhood or upbringing or anything, and so that statement holds so much truth to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it, like I said, it took a minute because I was like, it took me a minute to kind of process that. But then, especially, as the years go by and I teach more and more, it's like, oh, absolutely, I agree with that 100%. And I think that the other thing that's difficult about an academy is like sometimes we have to play bubble burster, where people might have a false idea about. They have a more romantic idea about what an art school is, and when you go to a representational school, or at least ours, it's a
Absolutely.
we approach painting as a craftsmanship, and just like as if you were going to carpentry school, there's a way you construct a painting, the way you construct a cabinet, and this is how you do that. So it's not about. It's kind of ironic in the sense that it's not about technicalities, but the long-term goal is artistic. We want to get to a point where the technicalities become so ingrained that you don't have to put any energies into it. And you can then,
muscle memory.
Yeah, and then you can free yourself up to think about composition, content, those broader topics that are more poetic and artistic and should take up more
But
focus.
I think also as an organization and a school that caters to anybody and everybody. So I do think that we have a philosophy as a group in which we try to democratize in a way. Like we there's no barrier for taking classes with us.
Right.
And
you don't have to be at a certain level before you come in. Right.
So there's no barrier for entry. The only portfolio requirement is so that I understand that you know what you're getting. And I think part of that is because we understand and we appreciate and respect that everybody has a different intention for obtaining the skill set.
Yeah.
Some people may be doing this more for recreational reasons, which is just as valid as the student who is doing it for professional reasons.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe, and I believe most of our instructors do as well, is that both are just as valid, and that is the benefit of the structure of our instruction, which is individualized. And Garrett takes
too much
time.
Too much time with
we
each
take
student.
we take a lot of time to understand you.
Yeah.
And that is baked into our methods of teaching, is to understand your goals. And while it is really nice and really rewarding for us as instructors to have the student who is super passionate, dedicated, we put just as much energy into an understanding the student who is here for a more of a recreational reason.
Yeah.
They're just as valid, and we appreciate all types of students, but I think that's also kind of the drive for us, making sure that there is no barrier for entry, or a barrier to that information.
Well, there's two ideas that individually what you guys said made me think. So I'm going to say the two ideas and then try to maybe dive a little further into each of them, but I have to say them out loud so I don't forget. One is what Daniel Graves' introduction was for me, and being that very clear that this is a technical school. Excuse me. And two was making it accessible to everyone relative to what their ultimate goals are. So on the one hand, the first day you have this orientation, you get all the new students coming in, and you have Susan Dettori and Daniel Graves, and they give you some expectations and tell you a little bit about the school schedule, all of that. And one thing Dan was always adamant about was saying, we can help you correct things. We're giving you the tools. This is about, skill development. The moment we tell you your leg's too long and you say, well, I did that on purpose because blah, 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 some aesthetic reason, your education here is done, because that's not something we discuss. And I totally understand what he's saying and largely agree that is should be the main the main thing that is focused on at a school. The place where I disagree is that it completely eliminates any discussion within the walls of the school about the post-application of the skill. And so over the years, now I have, what is it, 2022? I have 19 years of seeing this and kind of paying attention to the long-term effects of this approach. It just seems that the majority of students adopt the study as the art. Because that's what they learn to appreciate. It's what they hear praised daily. It's what they're comfortable with, and without that that discussion or demand or conversation about okay, so here's how, if you're turning form in the model room or whatever, here's how you would apply that to what you're working on at home, because the students are bringing in what they're working on at home. In fact, like when I was at the Florence Academy, I had a couple of teachers discourage me from painting at home when I was in the drawing program, because you're a draftsman and you shouldn't be painting. And I think I was constantly begging my students to be producing stuff at home, to be thinking about things, to be giving themselves their own, following their own ideas, developing their own vision, because whatever we're doing at the school is useless unless you have a motivation for it. The motivation shouldn't be to do a good academic nude, because nobody gives a shit if you could do a good academic nude, especially now, right? Like in 2003, it was amazing.
Different story, yeah.
Right? In 2005,
Yeah.
it was still pretty cool.
Yeah.
But in 2022,
Damn, it doesn't.
everybody can do it. So I think that part of, if you could infuse that aspect of the conversation into the academies, and just constantly remind the students that you're learning this for a different reason. And it's not about doing a good cast drawing. A good cast drawing is the door you walk through to get where you want to go. But let's talk about where you want to go. And so that leads me to what you're saying, which is, not everybody wants to go to the same place. And, I don't disagree with some of the academies having a rigid entry process and, asking for portfolios and having a certain standard. I think that's great, right? The best students, we get in, and that, raises the level of everyone else, and like Juilliard or whatever. But I do love the idea. I've just started a mentorship program because I shut down my 4-year program, and I just want to. I felt like I was kind of handicapping students by not helping them become artists and only helping them become good technicians. And I really, 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 over the years, learned about myself that what I'm mostly interested in is helping people make a career out of this, or help them just take their vision and maybe just do it a little bit better, help them with the little technical things they may be struggling with or whatever. So I've started just a one-on-one mentorship program, and the whole idea is, the very first thing we do is have a long conversation individually about what is it that you want to do, because my 84-year-old student doesn't need to go through the bark drawing course, right?
Right, different.
She
I mean,
doesn't.
some of them need to.
I mean, she's already done that.
Yeah.
She's already done all
Yeah.
that. But she.
Oh, we're talking about a specific person now. Okay.
Well, she doesn't need to. There's things that like if there's something a little wonky, it doesn't necessarily negatively affect the painting, because
Yeah.
the painting has a different purpose.
Yeah.
So it's been nice to kind of dive into that individual development relative to the goals, because this education can, for any of those that might want to come here or anywhere else, it can be very intimidating to walk in and see the brilliance of the drawings on the wall.
Yeah, it can.
It can feel inaccessible, but it really is learnable if you are the good student.
Yeah.
And you combine that with great teachers that you guys are. It's absolutely learnable. It's not something you have to be born with. People come in, I can't draw a stick figure, I can't, I don't know if I can do this, I'm scared, blah, blah, blah. If you're dedicated and you're willing to put in the time, this kind of instruction, it brings a certain clarity that most art schools don't have. And that clarity allows the accessibility. It kind of it gently brings you through that door of understanding, and makes it possible.
Yeah, I think that it really is like playing the piano. It's like, yes, you see 2-year-olds playing like a Mozart sonata or whatever, but it's a language that is teachable and learnable. And so yes, again, some people will have maybe a natural born acuity to it, and they just acclimate to it rather quickly. I mean, art history is full of a spectrum of people like Sargent in his early 20s,
Insane.
masters painting. And
have
then,
you seen? There was a website. I don't know if it's still out there, but there was a website that chronicled every work by Sargent by year.
Oh, really?
And there's watercolors he was doing when he was 13, 14, 15, as he's going through the Swiss Alps with his family, that aren't good for a 13, 14, 15-year-old. They're brilliant for any age. They're so brilliant. And then the story is that when he was 18, he walked into Carlos Duran's studio and laid out his portfolio, and his father was with him, and the head of the studio, not Carlos Duran, but the head student, I think it was Beck, came over. I'm sorry if I'm that's not accurate. Somebody's gonna catch me if I'm not accurate.
That's what the internet is for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, the studio shut down. Everybody came over and they're like, holy crap, who's this? What is this kid? And then 6 months later, the buzz around Paris, which is the epicenter of the art world at the time, the best of the best are all there. Carlos Duran is highly, highly respected. And the buzz around town is, we're not sure if Duran is teaching Sargent or Sargent's teaching Duran.
Yeah.
So you have those wonderkins, right? You have those people where it makes sense to them intrinsically.
Yeah.
But not me, and not most of us.
No,
So this kind of education with its clarity certainly makes it more accessible for the average person. I'm sorry, I keep cutting you guys off.
No, that's fine. I think that when it comes to the difference between kind of like technical kind of excellence and poetry, kind of what you were talking about earlier, I think that one of the things that I think has happened is it's just a knee-jerk reaction to, I think, maybe the suffocation of kind of a realist tradition, where for a while it was. Now I have to say, just as a brief kind of footnote, that I actually am kind of a little bit of a minority, where I actually do like a lot of contemporary art as well, and I actually do like Rothko and Pollock to an extent, and I actually like a little bit of everything, but I think that because there was an active suppression of that, because it was a reliance on technicality as opposed to like a poetry of sorts, or I guess I mean the whole idea behind kind of the abstract expressionism was that they said realist painting is lying to you. It's trying to tell you that this two-dimensional surface is in 3 dimensions, and we're lied to enough on a daily basis via the government, blah, blah, blah. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to create this purely optical, flat experience, and that is realer than anything else. And for the time, it's just like, it was mind-blowing, and it still is. Granted, it's not everybody's taste, but especially in a realist school. But But the thing that I think that they did understand, which I think it's to your point about kind of this like a post-education application, is that they weren't under any misconceptions that this is a lie. And I think that sometimes what I notice with students is and I think that people who are representationalists in general, they think that it is possible to replicate reality exactly.
Sure.
And it's not. It's
because they're never going to be the same
never.
thing. A painting is never a person.
I may have this, so internet, correct me, but I think it was Rembrandt who said that the first thing an artist needs to do is to accept submission to reality. Reality will always be superior to your work.
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to painting, and what I think makes representational painting difficult, among many other things, is that it seems as simple as just copy what you see and that's it. But a lot of our students actually, and one of the things that I kind of pride myself on, is a lot of our students, English is not their first language. And so one of the teaching tools I use a lot of, and I know this because Julie points it out to me, is I use analogies a lot, just to kind of make.
You're very good at analogies.
It's I think it's I don't know, it just is just how I go about it. But one analogy I use is, so if you're bilingual, when you take one language and translate it into another, there are some words that just don't exist. And so you have to invent new words. You have to either add more words or explain the meaning of it, but it's not literal, but it still conveys the same essence.
Right.
When painting in reality, there are things in the language of reality that don't translate to the language of paint. And then you need to either add, adjust, or change things, not for poetic reasons, or again, not to make it artistic license. It's to make visual sense. And unfortunately, it's not as easy as just copying what you see, because that would make it 10 times easier. And that's where I think it gets kind of like what you were talking about, where it's like, it's not about making the most expertly rendered every hole in the paper filled in cast drawing or painting. These are The other analogy that I use is like it's like if painting is if you're an athlete, this is the equivalent of going to a gym, but this is not the sporting event that you're participating
Absolutely.
in.
Exactly.
Right.
And so it's like, this is where you lift weights, this is where you mess up, this
Right.
is where you're safe to do that, and this is
Yep.
where you try out things, but this is not the main event.
Right. Right.
And I think that sometimes, as you were saying earlier, gets lost. And I think, again, it's because of that, the fact that it was absent for so long. Usually
Sure.
the pendulum is now just swinging in the other direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the need early on in 1995 through 98 was a critical response to the almost annihilation of skill, or even just the not skill in art, because there were still some
sure.
skilled artists, but the passing on of the information, how to teach it, how to organize it into a progressional approach so that it could be taught, taught and learned. And I think necessarily they had to refocus their attention on, we've got to reacquire this skill set. And so, Jacob Collins, working with Tony Ryder and Ted Seth Jacobs and Daniel Graves working with Richard Lack. I think, them being so young in it and the need being there, they put all of their attention on that. And now, when I left the academy, I thought, I started my school, and then I thought, I think I'm the next generation. So what does that mean? Is this, how can I evolve it? What's the next step? If it can expand, how does it expand? And to me, it was really critically clear that it needs to now focus on art making, because even then, I didn't, finally graduate till 2008. And so even then I was aware that there was kind of the realist art world that was more like kind of Richard Schmid, and there was the Western art world, and then there was Scott Christensen, Matt Smith, and then there was now this little pocket of academic, which was different. It was tighter. It was more maybe fundamentally skilled, but there wasn't really art coming out of it, and I was desperately aware of that.
Yeah, and it's kind of challenging because it's supposed to be like that to an extent.
I'm sorry, that might have sounded like I don't think that Jacob Collins or Daniel Graves were making art.
Oh, no,
that's not what I'm claiming.
No,
at all.
I didn't think
it was the students coming out. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but it's challenging because that's kind of again, it is a technical school, so it is partially, right, yeah, it's not about, you're supposed to be doing figure paintings, again, not that that's an art form in it, well, it is kind of an art form, of course, in and of itself, but when I look at an academically painted nude, to me that's not a painting per se.
Sure.
It can be
beautiful.
It's a painting, but it's not a painting.
For us, it's an exercise,
sure, more
so than it is
saying
an artistically
a purposeful work of art.
Yeah, and that's kind of been people who some of my students who have studied with me will probably kind of remember me saying this, is that one of my biggest critiques of contemporary realists is that their affection for the past outweighs their understanding of the present, and so they constantly are using history as a measuring tool for, am I good enough? Well, does this look like it's a Rembrandt? Does it look like it's a Caravaggio? I love them to death. Those artists are in my top 5, but you have to be using reality as your in my understanding. I should clarify my philosophy of art, my philosophy of oil painting, and especially as representational painting relates to our current century. I feel like it needs to be an acknowledgement and acceptance of the advances and the moving forward of art history from that period of time.
Yeah.
It can't be. It's kind of like. This might come across insulting to some, and I don't mean it as that. Sometimes representational painters can be very conservative in their taste level, and it does come across as a little "Make America Great Again," where it's like "Make art great again," right? Where it's all representational and there's no conceptualization of anything, no advances, and I just don't agree with
It's
that.
just wanting to
regurgitate.
regurgitate, or it's that there's this holdings of the sacredness of what's been done. And I don't know a lot of artists that want to necessarily recreate the past. I don't think there's a lot of artists that are wanting to like pretend they live in the 19th century, although there is a lot of work that someone said this to me. They said it looks a little bit like a Renaissance fair where people are sort of just dressing up in that tradition.
That is
but
so something I would say.
That is definitely something Garrett would
I
say.
would totally
but
say that. Yeah.
But I think the majority of artists.
Well, do you think part of it is a result of the praise or attention that specific approaches or content gets because it is
So
like
more
an echo of the
market-driven-
past,
market-driven
right? You know, like, I don't know.
Well, I think it comes from peer review, right? I mean, when you're in the Academy, and all you hear is like people talking about this artist or that artist,
Bouguereau, Jerome,
or even like the other students, like the students that are 2 years ahead of you that are doing like this amazing still out. Oh, you got to see this, and it's amazing, and so you learn to appreciate things through a certain lens that is sort of built by your peers and your environment. For me, it's a little bit more like I understand painting enough to know that what they were doing in the 19th century, naturalists or Velázquez, who was like out of his time, and Rembrandt and Vermeer, who were total outliers in their time. What they do is so hard to do. It's so hard to work at that level. It's like trying to break Usain Bolt's records. It's like trying to at least like match that kind of athleticism or virtuosity in paint. And so it's not necessarily that I'm trying to paint peasant people doing hay.
Right.
Baling, I don't know what you call it, doing hay.
So, you know what,
That's the new drug of choice.
I
They're
totally
doing
sailed
hay.
past it, like, yep, doing hay, got it.
Doing
I was
hay.
like, absolutely. Doing hay by Millet. You know? Oh, that rhymes.
That's going to be Ryan Brown's new masterpiece.
Doing hay.
But I think it's it's wanting to like live up to that tradition, right? For me, that's what it is.
Oh, sure.
I would just love to feel like the work I'm producing fits. If for some reason it hung next to a Lermite or hung next to a Sargent, I could hold my head up and say like, okay, it's different, but it's. Well, I don't want to put Sargent in there because he's different, but like a Waterhouse or whatever. I mean, I just feel like, can I feel like I'm living up to the people that I admire so much? But also I think what you're saying is actually quite relevant in that you still have to realize that you live in your own time, and there have been movements, like them or not, everyone's been exposed to. And not only that, but society has changed. The way that we think, even in the last 20 years, through I feel like almost like a more societal civil rights movement that we've gone through in the last 15 years, 10 years with the Me Too movement and whatever. We're starting to be more socially aware, and I think that's a great step to more global acceptance of everybody and lifestyles and hopefully cultures and an embracing of everything. There's a reality to our time that includes the history that brought us here, and trying to pretend that it didn't happen is not just a denial of reality. It is
True.
It is it's then shutting yourself off against or away from things that you could actually utilize to make your art more relevant.
Yeah.
I don't have to paint a Jackson Pollock. I don't even have to like Jackson Pollock.
Exactly.
I just need to know that it existed and that it changed the way people viewed things. And so pure representation is amazing, but what else is
impressive.
possible?
Yeah.
And I've just started to actually trying to explore that on my own, and I don't know where that's going to take me, but I'm trying to at least say what, there are different ways to offer a visual experience. What kind of visual experience can you give someone, and what is it that I want to do? Because I've gone through the pure representation for 15 years, and I'm not sick of it. I'm still gonna, there's still things I want to paint, and I want, absolutely everything to be well rendered or drawn or whatever. But I want to feel free to explore how else I might say something.
Yeah.
Well, this is also where I think, and you've discussed this as well in conversation, where I think what I really appreciate about the community and the environment here at ARA Boston, but in general, in terms of people who I surround myself with, is the conversation isn't limited to just the specific, very small and very focused skill set that we are doing within our exercises. What I appreciate is somebody like Garrett, who has an extensive knowledge about all different types of art, who, yes, can tell me that the nose is too big, but can also have a really in-depth and extensive conversation about the implications of certain symbolism because of his knowledge base. And so having such a, like you're saying, having, a lot of our students, English isn't even their first language, having different cultural and taste and style interests is so valuable. And the conversations that we have here, and even just look on our bookshelves, it's not, the conversation is outside of just the skill set that we teach. And I really appreciate what everybody brings to all the students bring to the table.
Yeah. Well, and that idea of representation, not necessarily, you can't really copy nature. It's never going to be exactly that. It's one thing I've been telling, the students in this landscape course, that I think, at the very beginning of your education, yes, you need to trust your reference, and hopefully your reference is nature.
Right.
Hopefully you're copying from life. Hopefully, and you're trying to copy as truthfully as you can observe it. But nature lies, and it lies relative to the language of painting, because you can't just do a one-for-one copy of what you're observing, because paint is a different language, and it uses it like you were saying, when you have a foreign student or language isn't their first language, English isn't their first language, it's hard to get the exact meaning of a word sometimes. And it's the same as, say, painting a flower. If you paint the petals exactly as you observe them, they're going to feel heavy and opaque. And you have to understand that in this language, I have to adjust the definition just slightly in order for it to really read properly. I'm sure that makes sense to you, but it's hard for students to understand sometimes initially that most of it can be painted as you see it.
Well,
but
there's this
you also have to play to the language of the medium you're using.
Right. It's kind of the alphabet that you're using. And
right.
There's this great exercise that I remember reading or listening when it came to so there was this television artist when I was a kid that would come up right before Bob Ross, which I watched religiously, and her name was Helen Van Wyck, and she actually lived up here in the North Shore area up here in Boston, and she was a realist painter. And she was on public television. I remember watching her as a kid. And she said that one of the exercises she was told, and I don't know why this fascinated me, but it stuck with me all these years, is that her teacher came in with a bag of apples and set them out on the table and said, okay, paint these apples. And she did. He comes back in, takes up all the apples, puts them in the bag, shakes it up, and says, okay, now tell me take each apple out of this bag and tell me which one that you paint is this apple in your painting. And she said she couldn't do it because she turned all of them to make them look kind of similar in a sense. And it was a good lesson about how to take something that could be rubber stamped and how do you choose that angle that makes it uniquely this apple, not just a textbook kind of the mill apple.
And then she said, "How do you like them apples?"
And
Big
damn.
Boston reference.
I watched Good Will Hunting on the plane ride here.
Oh, did you?
Just,
oh, yeah.
How do you like them apples?
Yeah.
It's one of the things that we always talk about at the school is how every movie that's supposed to take place in Boston, everyone talks, like they're from Boston, and it's like nobody talks. I mean, not nobody, but it's
like
it's
three
not,
people talk.
It's the firefighters I saw coming out of the sub shop.
Yes.
They did.
Oh, I mean, like you'll see, it's like everybody has like this like super hard accent movies. Like it's not really like that.
Well, I mean, kind of an interesting thing about Boston, especially from somebody who does not come from an art history background or like I have like a very surface level of like art knowledge.
Well, Julie and I complement each other really well on that because
we do.
if they've been dead for 100 years or so, I know who they are.
Yeah, and
if they're alive, Julie knows
I
who
know
they
who
are,
they
and
are.
I have no idea who they are. So
but the funny thing about Boston is we have a really deep history with representational art, but I actually think like today the art scene is, I would not call it very representational heavy. There's a few select organizations that champion it. There's a few galleries that are showing some really great technical work and some great representational work, but it's very, I think it leans heavily the other way, which I think is very ironic in a way for Boston being having such a history.
Well, I think that one thing that we're struggling with as a representational painter, and I think Daniel Sprigg said this in an interview.
Oh my God, Daniel Sprigg! Please come to Boston and teach me.
I really do love Daniel Sprigg.
You're my idol.
But he said something that I totally could relate to. It was like one of those like palpable moments that I was like, absolutely. Where he said, I think that a lot of artists today are crushed by the weight of art history, and they feel like there's nothing left to be done. Everything's been done. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, my hubris is I think we can do better, and I think we can surpass them and all this stuff. And what were we talking about? I don't
know, art history and representation. But I think that's a really good point in that just like representational and that Boston leans very contemporary. So this is the problem with drinking when you're doing a podcast.
Well, no, I lost the thought and it came back. I was like,
we can do better. We can do better as with we've learned from the past, and I do think that the contemporary, like the I guess I would call like the mid 1900s, where what I think is really awesome and valid about all those explorations is they were asking questions. Like that's what we're doing with art, is we're asking questions. And like the the urinal in the museum, like that's a question. I think it's a valid question, but like the pendulum can.
Well, some people would ask, it doesn't provide an answer, but I think I think that one of the things that as representationalists, that especially if you're a figurative artist, throughout art, so in art history, the church was the main patron, and the church had a series of scriptural myths and things that could, so like Saint Sebastian was an opportunity to paint the male nude in a very contorted kind of contrapposto kind of way, but it was a shared, everybody knew what that story was about, so people could kind of like, they had that nucleus of understanding of what this painting was, but then they could interpret it very kind of independently. Today that's not the case, obviously. So I think that there's a certain level of secularism that I think figurative artists are trying to reconcile with.
Right.
And I think that rather than the Catholic Church being the main patron, it's more like art history itself is the muse in which figurative artists are now reflecting on. And it's like, well, how can I reconcile being a figurative artist after post-abstract expressionism, where the alphabet, because throughout art history, the advancement was always what hasn't been done before. And some might argue that in terms of the language of oil paint, the alphabet has been explained. We have Van Eyck, being super as tight, literally rendering the weave in carpets. And then you have an extreme, the other end of the spectrum, you have Pollock. And now that you have that enormous alphabet available to you, how are you going to internalize that? And I think that is it's an amazing privilege to be presented with that challenge.
Yeah.
But I think it's also something that communally, I think that's something that as a larger movement, it's something that we're struggling with. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where the conversation becomes so important. And I think that art schools typically, globally, the master's programs, any sort of undergraduate art school program, typically it ends up having the right focus on the creation of art. But one thing I've heard said, about the contemporary world is, you can never answer a question. You can only ask it. Make sure that your art only asks questions, because the moment you give the answer, nobody cares about it anymore. But they're doing something right. And I think that the thing that they're doing right is they're thinking about the purpose behind what art is, what it could be, and what it is to the individual. And the thing that they're not doing right is giving them any tools to actually do it.
Right.
And the thing that, and then the flip-flop of that is the Academy's giving all the tools and never talking about the purpose
content,
and developing individuality. And it's really, to me, the handicap of and I am, if I went back 10 years and heard myself say this, I would probably kill myself, so that I never grew to the point where I said this.
Yeah.
But I almost would rather see someone be an individual than be a really skilled clone. And so I think it's a fatal handicap that is common at the academies right now. Fatal to the individuality of the artist. But there is an individual responsibility there. You can't just blame the academies.
No, you can't.
Because the students coming in goes back to what Andy said, which is you need to be a better student.
Yeah.
And and again, being a better student means trying to figure everything out. Being a student of history, being a student of living artists, dead artists, poring over everything you possibly can that's inspiring to you, and not just focusing solely on this
technical,
really dogmatic skill development. So being a good student means so much more.
That is a lot to ask of. That's a lot to ask of an individual. I mean, those of us who are unhealthy. And obsessed.
Interpret that word.
And this is a lot of times why, not to say that it's necessary, but it helps if you're obsessed, because you have to master. Moreover, I think in terms of representational art, you have to master multiple skill sets, not just the technical skill set, but you have to also be an eternal student of history and what's going on now, and philosophy. It's like you
need to have an acquaintance with the world.
It's a lot,
right? Because everything informs
that well that you draw from. Everything kind of informs that.
Yeah.
And I think an artist who actually kind of turns everything I'm saying on its head is Antonio Lopez Garcia, because he.
It's amazing.
He's amazing, but he also is the Don Quixote attitude of making it as close to reality as possible, and how that is like central to his theory about art, and like that still life of the refrigerator open, and what I love about that is everything is as usual is immaculately painted, but there are some things that are like the milk is sketchily put in. The milk went bad, and if he replaced it, that would be a fiction. It's like that's not what happened in reality. It went spoiled. I only got this far, and he has said you have to respect the circumstances that inform the artwork around it, and that's why some of his work, like he has this one painting that is just beautiful, where it's this it's a portrait of a couple. They They then get divorced, and I think and again, I might be really getting my facts wrong here, and I think it was like he did something wrong or something, so he paints him out. They reconcile, so he starts to redraw the head, and then they officially break up again. And he tacks on this tracing paper drawing of the child they were going to adopt or something. And so it's this like mixed media of traditional, but see, to me, that is a perfect mix of traditional artistry with contemporary theory. And I think it's just, and
that comes from like a deep, well-informed, well-established philosophy.
Yeah.
So what he's doing is not just, okay, I've been hired to paint a couple's portrait.
Yeah.
He's so artistically motivated that whatever whatever the piece needs, he's responding through a certain
to the
lens.
Understanding of the piece.
And he's dedicated to a philosophy.
Yeah.
He's deeply motivated by something really specific, a very, very specific way of viewing the world, a very specific way of viewing the art that he wants to make. And that's the kind of individuality that you mature into. But it takes years and years and years. If you think like learning how to draw this well takes, I mean, maybe that takes like 3 or 4 years, right? But developing your artistic maturity is constant.
Lifelong.
Study.
Yeah.
And so my argument to my students was, don't put that off. Don't just say, okay, now I'm going to spend this next 3 to 5 years just becoming a good technician, and avoid that, because that's the longer road, and you need to start thinking about it like yesterday. But generally speaking, they would put it off, and so.
Well, those are uncomfortable. Like those I think are uncomfortable because there isn't a tangible accuracy. There isn't a tangible right or wrong. There isn't a definitive person who can come by and say, yes, that's right.
It's not quantifiable.
Right? It's not quantifiable, exactly.
Quantifiable.
So
it's pure emotion.
That is so. That's the hardest part. Like, and that requires a really uncomfortable, deep vulnerability.
That's the key word.
And scary place. And you gotta go deep, and you gotta go to places you don't want to go.
And I think part of it to be a good student is you have to be daring to be vulnerable, because to learn.
I'm gonna just angle this.
Sorry,
because you're saying good things.
Sorry. So like in order to learn something, you have to admit ignorance, and that's a vulnerability. It's like, I don't know how to do this, and so that is a really vulnerable place to be. Right. But that's what it takes to be a good student, and what it takes to be a bad student is you allow ego to come in. Ego is the biggest hurt. If you were to, like, what's the most difficult thing to teach? Anybody who has any sense of ego, and you just have to get rid of that.
Yeah, ego and fear. I would say I would add fear to that.
A fear of failure, absolutely.
They're tied together, I think.
Yeah, and I think that vulnerability says more than just like being the mouse that runs out in a room full of cats to get the cheese. It's not just. It means. There's also a bravery to it. There's a vulnerability is a courage to, and I think it comes also with love, that you are willing to do something beyond the fear. That I'm willing to experiment, to test, to put myself out there, having no idea how people will respond or how even I will respond, but my love and motivation to do this thing is more powerful than my fear or my ego, right? I think that vulnerability means all of that. It's a very complex way of putting it, and I think that is, it's easy. I go back to the saying, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. I think you really have to like be willing to go for it and do it to really learn that lesson and understand exactly what we're talking about. I don't think any of us could talk about it unless we had gone through it and experienced it, and then and seen others do the same thing, and seen the successes that come out of it. I don't think you could break down Antonio Lopez Garcia in the way that you did unless you had, similar experiences of discovery.
Yeah, I mean, there's this documentary that he participated in years ago. This must have been like the mid to late 90s. I think it's called Painter of Light, which I know is Thomas Kincaid's thing, but and it's the whole documentary is him trying to paint this orange tree in his back. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
And he goes through he paints X's on the leaves to measure their growth rate to get it just right. And then, spoiler alert, at the end of it, he abandons it. He goes, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. But he does an amazing drawing instead. He does this. He goes, maybe next year. But just this, like, again, kind of like this, like a monastic devotion to this kind of, to this discipline.
It's a constant searching in a way. And that's
it's also a level of insanity.
That's
Absolutely.
why I say, like, you have to be like obsessed.
Yeah, OCD sort of.
Absolutely.
You're diving into either a concept, or you're searching and kind of groping in the dark for an idea, and it does require like complete abandon of like your mental state is and this is what it's like a meditation, and I always say there should be a word that is like hangry, but when you haven't painted in a while and you haven't been down that
and you're
road, and you're like, I just it's like hangry, but haven't been painting in a while.
I just saw an interview with Michael Jordan, who I grew up being a massive Michael Jordan fan, and I hope I get to meet him someday. But the interview was, they asked him if he ever thought about coaching, and he's like, no, definitely. I'm not interested. I'll never coach, because he said that the culture of the NBA has changed to the point where he didn't feel like he could ask the younger players to have the same level of insanity and approach that he took. And if he chose to coach and demanded that of them, he didn't know how emotionally he would respond if they didn't do it.
Yeah.
And basically he's saying, I would murder someone. I would. He's not. He didn't say that.
Well, no,
but he would react so negatively to that, because that's what he knew. That was his reality, and he did it willingly, because what was most important to him was winning, and it's a different way of thinking about it now. And I think, I don't know that we all have to be Antonio Lopez Garcia, but we have a piece of it.
Try.
We have a piece of that sort of insanity where there's this constant motivation and a constant craving to get better, and a craving for more knowledge and more experiences and seeing more cool things and becoming more aware of more artists and whatever. So,
well, and I think, in terms of kind of, again, being a good student or just being motivated, whenever I saw improvement, that just uplifted me, and I just felt like there are very few highs in this world that comes close to that sensation of like where I was like struggling with how to create a transition, and then like I recognize I don't have that struggle anymore, and I can do that rather proficiently. It just like you just feel like you cured cancer or something. You just feel amazing about it, and it just like that little glimmer of just that enlightenment lasts, at least that could last me a long time in terms of
I mean I did my first good figure drawing February 17th 2003. Michael Jordan's birthday, by the way. But I remember it. Ben Fensky was the model, and I did a drawing, and it was good. It wasn't great. It was just a 2-hour evening pose, but I knew how I did it, and I knew that I knew how I did it, and I knew I could do it tomorrow. And it was this first, like, oh my gosh, this wasn't an accident, and it was life-changing.
See,
Unfortunately,
I remember my lows much better.
Oh, well, of course, yeah.
yeah, those are
Those,
deep.
Garrett has been a part of a few of my lows.
But I think that you have to also, on that note, find joy in the incremental steps forward, because it is like when the first thing that you're made aware of when you study this way is how crappy you are and how long it's going to take to get where you want to go, and that can be incredibly discouraging. And I know that even people that have gone through and become really great technicians, really, really, really great technicians, still suffer from the inability to find joy in the incremental forward steps. And that's debilitating. And then they don't last. They don't end up, making paintings or promoting themselves and trying to get into galleries, because they're never satisfied, because it's not perfect, whatever perfect means.
And you see
and that can be a disease.
And you see that in the 19th century. You see these, there's a lot of them out there, of these amazing paintings by unknowns, because they just didn't last, or you see these amazing student figure drawings and paintings by these anonymous students. Like, well, what happened to this person? They were amazing. They did this, it's just that kind of, can't, I guess there are just some things that are not really, I guess, teachable, really. I can't.
Yeah. I mean, you can't talk somebody into liking their own stuff. You can't talk them into, I can't tell you how many, people have been like, oh my gosh, this is so good. I mean, I had one student who, he's like, I'm just not understanding value. Like this drawing sucks. And I'm like, no, it really doesn't. Like, look at how well you've balanced this, and look at how well you've done this, and you've explained this, and all the things you're saying you didn't do, you did do. And I couldn't talk him into believing it. So that's rare. Fortunately, I think people do kind of find joy, like you said, like those incremental steps forward are such a great feeling.
Well, I think there's also the issue the issue can become, especially later on in training, is the confusion of the technical to make or break a piece, because how many amazing pieces aren't really technically that solid, but it's an amazing painting, right? So I think part of it's the fear of, like, well, if I just get really technically good, then everything I make is going to be amazing, right? So,
but good design with poor execution is always better than good execution and poor design.
Correct.
And so again, that's something that's typically not taught in the academies.
Right.
But even when I was trying to help set up casts, I was like, the most important thing is that you create interesting shapes. This is going to be, because the shapes are what's going to define this. Yes, you're going to learn how to turn form. Yes, you're going to, I would, choose a cast you're aesthetically drawn to. Light it in the way that aesthetically creates the most interest, because that should always be the motivation. If you're setting up a model, contrapposto, whatever, but light it beautifully. Pose the hands. Get the feet right. I mean, all of it. Think about every aspect of it. Aesthetic.
I would like to offer
Awareness,
a counterpoint to this.
Oh boy.
Is I have a real pet peeve when people claim to me that, like, well, I need to be able to like what I'm working on.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you can only work on something when you want to, that's a problem.
You're not going to be a professional for
It's
very
not
long.
going to work out.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to learn some things.
Sure.
But if your goal is a professional capacity of art making, if you can't work when you don't like the thing you work on at that moment, it's going to be a problem.
Well, there's two sides to that, I think, because one is that even if you really loved it when you started it,
you're going to hate it.
The majority of the process is work.
You hate
and
it.
That's
in the
hard.
Middle.
It's
I
really
hate it
hard.
In the middle. Yeah.
But and so you have to stay focused on where it's going and not where you're at, because you can only work through where it is
Yeah.
if you stay focused. But the other thing is that I think that part of that statement is true, is that if you are choosing to work on something, make it something that's aesthetically pleasing to you right from the very beginning. Like if we ever had a model in Florence that I just, I went through just a little bit faster. So they chose positions in the model room based on who's been there the longest. And so I was always last. So I'm in the corner with like the sliver of light and, worst pose. And it was hard for me to, get into that. I just was, there was models where, there's one particular model that like, I didn't care at all. I could not force myself to like the pose or anything about it. And I think maybe I did a week and a half of a 4-week pose. And the rest of the time I just went painting because I was like, I'm so not drawn to that. So screw it. I'm going to go find something I am. I'm in Florence.
Well, right, I know.
I'm going to go find something I am drawn to.
It's going to be hard to find something.
Let me figure out how to turn form on something else because this ain't it. I'll wait till the next one. So I think there's that side of it too. Like if you have control over what you're doing, like a simple cast or still life or something, be aesthetically driven. Try to do things that you are visually drawn to.
And I think the visual's the key word. I think you need to think visually, and I think this comes into still life because people will think more in terms of what it means to them than the visual language. So they'll say like, well, I am, I don't know, like I'm a botanist, and like these like little things are really important to me, so I want to have them in a still life. It's like, right, but you can't see them very well. It's like you have to be thinking that painting is a language, a visual language. And I think that the other thing too that people need to do in general is you need to paint a lot, but you need to look a lot too. I think a lot of people, like, I'll throw out, do you know this artist? Do you know this painting?
Right.
What? And it's like, you need to have that, again,
curiosity and just a constant. That's what I say to young students who, they come in from the first day. I mean, not so much anymore because I don't, do the 4-year thing, but I would say from the very first day, you need to be painting at home. And they'd be like, some of them are just totally blank slates, right? So how do they even get started? They don't have any ideas. I know what that's like. They don't even know where to begin looking. So the first thing, I've got a folder of like 20-something thousand masterworks that you bring a hard drive. I'll give you that. All the museums I've ever been to, I take a really nice camera. Here's all the high-res images of what I've taken. Here's PDF books, everything. I'll give you 500 gigs of information. Just bring a hard drive. And then pour over paintings. You want a list of living artists, dead artists? Here it is. I'll write all this stuff down. Go figure this out. Because the first thing is to be exposed to what good art is. And then through that, you start to generate an understanding of what it is that you gravitate towards. And from that, you start to get inspired. And that's the first step. You've got to like really get out there and look at
build
everything.
Who you are as a visual artist, because you know what you like and what you respond to and what you don't, and both are equally important. So even if you don't think you're going to like anything in like this modern art wing, or just go through it, even if it's a brisk walk, at least if anything, you'll just confirm your suspicions. It's just like, but it's all exposure.
And you'll get your steps in.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so this is a totally unexpected conversation. I mean, I guess, no, that's not true because I didn't really come in with any expectations, but
these microphones are already here.
What I was kind of thinking of doing is having you just talk about the school and maybe what the curriculum is, what students can expect, how to apply, blah blah blah. But I hate to even pivot to that, although I think it's important that you just get some basic information out there. I didn't expect to just get into great philosophical conversation. far more enjoyable than just a strict, here's what our curriculum is. So thank you for this, because these are the conversations that made me want to do a podcast, because I typically will have these anyway whenever I travel, and I was finding it very difficult to like share those experiences with my students, to come home, and I was so excited, so inspired, so elated that I got these experiences. Then I'd be like, and then he said this, and you should see the studio, and blah blah blah, and I just couldn't, I didn't feel like I was quite painting the picture for them properly or broadly enough. And so I thought, I've got to figure out a way to record these. And this is why, because these are the conversations that make me so grateful for the fact that I get to do this and be in this world. So, but I do want to pivot. And if you could just kind of give a basic summary of like maybe how people can apply, what they can expect in terms of what's available in classes, and what they can expect in terms of progression, and then we'll wrap up there.
Well, I mean, like we said before, like what's important to us too as instructors and as a community is there is no barrier for entry for us. We do not require students to be full-time. We do not require an application. The application or a portfolio is mostly so that I feel confident that if people sign up for classes, they understand what they're paying for.
It also gives us a sense of where they're coming from in their development.
Where they're coming from.
Have they had prior training? Or have they never picked up a pencil?
Which doesn't matter in terms of acceptance.
No, everyone's accepted.
Students, I don't care what you've done.
Unless you're like not a nice person.
Yeah.
No.
I don't care what you've done. I care what you want to do.
Exactly.
And then let's.
Do you understand the type of education you're going to get when you get here? And I do think one thing I'm very proud of, and it's not just me, it's all the instructors and the student base, is the community that is present at this school. And part of it is a result of the wide variety of backgrounds, styles, approaches, and personalities that are at the school, both instructors and students. Many of our students and instructors do not have English as a first language. We have abstract artists who have been through our program and are teaching. We all appreciate the wide variety of personal art making that is out in the world. And I do think that offers a perspective in which the tangible skill sets that we're focusing on can be applicable to many different approaches, and we teach that way. And we do teach in a more individual one-on-one approach. So anybody can apply and everyone will be accepted, and you can come here for 3 hours a week. You can come here for 12 classes a week. You can take the full-time program. Everybody's learning the same stuff.
I mean, there is some limitations in terms of space.
Yes.
But you haven't maximized.
Like physical space, right. So like we've had a couple terms sell out. It was surprisingly right after the pandemic. We've had a full sold out few semesters after the pandemic. But for the most part, we can, if there's a surge in interest, we add on additional classes. So the limitation tends to be mostly either space and or instructor capability, like how many instructors we have on. But if we see a surge in interest, we put more instructors. There was a point in time that Garrett and I were both teaching the same class, and we will never usually put more than 15 to 16 students per instructor per class, because we do believe in giving each person their individual instruction time. But we do have like evening classes and workshops that have no prerequisites. So even if you've never painted before or never drawn before and you just want to try out a class, any of our workshops or evening classes are applicable to anybody.
Yeah.
Our main program, however, it doesn't matter if you've been painting for 20 years or you've never drawn before. Everyone starts at the very beginning,
Sure.
learning how to sharpen
Yeah.
your pencils. And that's not only for you as a student, but for us as instructors to understand that, number one, you understand our communication, our
Sure.
vocabulary, our literally what we mean when we say
which is
value versus whatever.
It slightly
Yeah.
alters from school to
Exactly.
school.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's being on the same page, understanding of expectation levels, and also so we can get to know who you are and what I
How you
Garrett,
go about
Garrett was
things.
my main instructor when I was training here.
Oh,
And-
that explains it.
Yeah, totally. Right? So he really takes the time to get to know your goals and your motives as a student here, and all the instructors do, and we all understand what it's like to be in those shoes, because we don't hire people who are outside the program.
Yeah.
We train students to become instructors,
Yeah.
and to see the relationships that have grown, friendships that have grown out of the instructor-student relationships, and the conversations that have been had, like just even in the lunchroom or whatever.
Yeah.
It's so motivating and inspiring to see, and I still use Garrett as a resource as a teacher.
Yeah.
I'm always stuck on something. I'm going to go to Garrett for input on things.
We have a rule, which is if you see something,
say something.
Because there was, I forget what it was, but there was something.
It was a portrait.
It was a portrait, and Julie was like, I feel like the proportion on the nose or something is off. I'm like, well, I saw that. I just didn't know if I should say anything. And she goes, all right, new rule. If you see something, say something.
Say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like I'll go to Nadine if I'm like, okay, so
Yeah.
I can tell this is working conceptually, but I think there's something off, like there's something going on like abstractly with the shapes. I'll go to Nadine because she has an abstract background and she has a great visual design sense. Or
Yeah.
I have issues with anatomy and I go to John and say, there's something going on with the elbow. It looks weird and lumpy. What am I doing wrong here? And we use each other as a resource.
Yeah.
And the students do that with each other, which is so cool.
There is a huge trickle-down effect that happens because they'll see that you do that.
Yeah.
And that is great for an academy. It just makes all the doors are open,
Yeah.
right?
And it's like Emmy Demus is our figure instructor. That's if I think something's passable, I usually be like, Em, can you come and take a quick look? Because I know you're going to find something. Yeah, because I know that you're going to find something.
She has
I'm
the highest
missing.
standards out of all of us.
I know you're going to find it, and I'm not seeing it.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the curriculum, though, it's fairly standard for I think a representational or atelier process.
Sure.
So it's that 4-tier system, working from the flat, made by Charles Barg, the Barg lithographs, drawing from sculpture and fine charcoal, moving to grisaille, in oil paint, working from a cast, and then the progression to limited palette, full palette, and then we have the still life section, which is where, after learning the basics on how to construct a painting from all the prior lessons, then the still life is the stage in which you start to understand the virtuosity of paint and how can I manipulate paint, how can I make it thin and kind of scumbled in this area, but I'm impastoing it to achieve this texture in this area. How do you use the language of it? And that's with still life is just the easiest because you can have a lot of different objects of different varieties, and it's all in one setting. It just is very convenient.
And that's also where
Composition.
we find that that we're encouraging most students to start to explore their personal voice.
Yeah.
That
And
authorship.
the authorship, exactly. Especially with more of our full-time students who are able to invest a little bit more time and energy into the setup process.
And we know that they can handle more challenges than one at a time. It's like, well, normally I would say no, but you've proven...
Yeah, at that point you have such an understanding of who they are, what they're capable of, how they think, how they interpret. So,
And it's, and that's always... I mean, that's always really rewarding as a teacher to see the aha moment happen for someone else.
Yeah,
You're like, oh, okay, that's,
And it's also cool to see how how different a lot, I'm really proud of a lot of the still life work that's come out of here, because I do feel like there's a wide breadth of voices, and it's really interesting to see the direction that different students start to take in terms of some of those personal choices.
This is where I start to get a little kind of like those like jokily kind of snotty comments where I'm like, oh, so this is your final composition. I thought you were just throwing everything up.
It's cool, and it's really neat, and it's great to see like students start to stretch their kind of creative legs in a way.
Yeah, it is funny too, because there's sometimes you see, I guess this is what being a parent is like, where it's like, oh, I remember making that mistake.
So they went way too big.
But you know what's
way
really,
too
you know what
complicated.
sometimes is really difficult though as a teacher is, do I let them hit that brick wall going 120, or do I interrupt them? Because sometimes you learn more by experience being the best teacher.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get that answer wrong. That's where I still struggle. Should I intercept this, or should I let them fumble a bit?
So that's not like being a parent. Being a parent because as a kid, you don't blame yourself for anything. So when you're a parent, you see your kids do something stupid that you probably did, but you don't remember that it was a mistake for you.
Right.
Right? So they're just like dumb. Why are you being so dumb?
Yeah.
When you were definitely just as dumb.
I always say that, like Garrett and I tend to play good cop, bad cop. And I'm usually the bad cop. And I say to the students, I say, guys, my job is to save you from yourself. Because you think you want to put all this fabric in here. You think you want to put books in here. You think you want to do all this. And then when it takes you 6 months to do it, you're going to be complaining. So I'm here to save you from yourself.
Two quick things before I forget. So a little while ago, you said, you don't want to be groping in the dark. That's going to be the title of my memoir, Groping in the Dark. And the other, actually, in that same conversation with Andrew Emerald, where he said, it's more important that you're a great student. The other thing that he said too, and I forgot about this, it was in the same sentence almost. He goes, and the assignments that you do here is the least you could do to be better.
Wow.
And I was like, yep, totally.
Andy.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Andy.
He needs to write a little quote book.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Andy's great. And the other thing about Andy, Mamma Mia. He says Mamma Mia all the time. I loved it so much. Everything, Mamma Mia.
You know what? I'm gonna start. I already said 2 days ago. I'm gonna start using the phrase "hot diggity" more.
Okay.
It's important to have goals.
It's important to have goals. And on that note,
hot diggity.
Yeah.
On that note,
it's not gonna catch on, is it? Damn it!
It might.
Stop trying to make fetch happen.
Don't give up.
Okay.
Don't give up so quickly.
Mamma mia, hot diggity.
So yes, thank you guys so much for sitting down and having this conversation with me. It was amazing. I love what you guys are doing. I'm glad I could just come in every once in a while and be a small part of, just on the peripheral of it. I'm a huge fan. So appreciate your time.
Doors open. You're always welcome, and we're always happy to have you.
Everyone's welcome here.
Sounding a little culty, but okay.
I know. You just have to give us all your money.
You're just not welcome to leave. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
All right.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You give the street, your body and mine. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, but I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh, but I don't wanna miss you, baby. So I stand up and speak just my mind. Oh. You're chilling in the rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're channeling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. My appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, 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 oh,
No one knows my